Sitting in the dark, listening to a little smooth jazz while he sharpens his 12-inch K-bar. That's a knife, please.
Show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And in this episode, I'm going to show you something, now that this gag order is lifted, that all but verifies my investigation into the case. We finally have cold, hard proof. And I'm going to have to almost apologize to everybody because I did a video a little over a month ago and everybody thinks Pav's crazy. But after this video, there would have been a deal that was made long before the deal was told to the public, as we've seen in the corrected dates in the docs of the deal. And it just coincidentally happened right after this video that I put out. And I believe in my heart of hearts that they gave me too much time to stare at the facts in this case. And I was about to nail this entire thing. And they made it go away strangely right after this video. And now that we have some new evidence from interviews with people, it's going to verify what I said in this video. What's interesting is this wasn't even one of my most watched videos. Some of my videos where I really nailed some things, those were the ones that they tried to shadow ban and not get out there to too many people. But when I'm done with what I'm saying in this video, I think you're going to agree with old Pav that after this video, the pressure was put on them so much that they couldn't go much further. And I watched a video from one of my heroes, True Crime Design. She did the Omerta video this morning, and it was amazing. Y'all should go watch it. I'll put that in the description of the comments. I'm taking a lot of pain relaxers or muscle relaxers, whatever you want to call them. I'll put the link to that video in the description of this video. There we go. But hold on to your hats, folks, because if you think old Pav wasn't right on the money and the closer we got to trial was the closer I was getting to solving this thing, well, then you've got another thing coming. And I've got other information that I'm going to be bringing to you that is going to blow your heads clean off your shoulders. So I've got to be careful when I bring that to you because it'll bring everything that we've talked about to a final conclusion, and it's in black and white right in front of your very eyes. Before I get to that one, though, I got to dispel the moronic things that are being said now about Brian Koberger and Papa Rogers and all this stuff. And that book by Patterson was the biggest farce book I've ever, it wasn't even well written. I mean, it drove me crazy. But we'll get into all that. First, I got to show you why I believe this thing, they made this thing go away so fast. Because I had hit it right on the head. I hit the nail right on the head. And I'll show you some proof of that before this video is done. First, let's revisit the video that I did over a month ago that I believe put this thing to bed. But right now, I want to start with this time frame right here, 1:31 a.m. And that's when you hear on Linda Lane, "I see you, Farley." Now, it's always been my contention that he was placed right there at those Linda Lane apartments as a lookout, looking for when people got home and making sure other people didn't come home with them. Then at 1:56 a.m., we've got Eric G. drops off Kaylee and Maddie. Okay, now here's what I'm going to attempt to prove in this video. I'm going to attempt to prove that the crime starts at approximately 2:54 a.m. with Kaylee and Maddie being subdued, but not being unalived. I'm also going to attempt to prove that the atrocity will actually take place between 3:52 a.m. and 4:17 a.m., and also that Ethan and Xana arrived home somewhere during this time period. and 3 to 4 assailants were involved in this atrocity. So if you're thinking it is not in line with what I have on the screen right here, and you're not going to be able to get your mind around it, don't watch any further. So once again, it starts off at 1:56 a.m. where Kaylee and Maddie were brought home by, we believe, Eric G., the driver. A lot of people have contention with that, so I got a question mark around it. But we believe the person driving this vehicle dropped Kaylee and Maddie home at 1:56. Now, when we go to this, after spending an evening out, Dylan, Bethany, Kaylee, and Maddie returned to their home in the early morning hours, and at approximately 2 a.m., they met up in Kaylee's bedroom. I'm going to try to assume this is all true and talk for a while before going to bed. Not all true, but I'm going to assume that they all met up in Kaylee's room at 2 a.m. The fifth roommate, Xana, was out with her boyfriend, Ethan. They weren't home yet, so never does say when they got home. I believe they got home after 3:50. The roommates debated going out to a food truck for a late snack, prompting Dylan to send a text at 2:10 a.m. to an Uber driver she knew to see if he was driving. Now, we later find out that they state that Uber driver was actually Eric G. And ultimately, however, the girls decided just to go to bed. Now, when I read that, at first I read the roommates debated going out to a food truck for a late snack, and I assume the roommates included the roommates, Dylan, Bethany, Kaylee, and Maddie. But everything's cryptic and can be interpreted. It could have meant Dylan, Bethany, Kaylee, and Maddie met up in Kaylee's room. And then the roommates, who are the roommates? Well, that would be Dylan and Bethany, debated going out to a food truck for a late snack, prompting Dylan to send a text at 2:10 to an Uber driver she knew. But ultimately, however, the girls decided to just go to bed. So does that mean the roommates and the girls are two separate entities? Are the roommates Dylan and Bethany, and are the girls Kaylee and Maddie? So this can all be interpreted very strangely in many different ways. In this one, that's pretty much the way I'm going to interpret it. They all met in Kaylee's room at 2 a.m. The roommates debated this could mean just Dylan and Bethany, and the girls decided to just go to bed, Kaylee and Maddie. So the roommates debated going out. They text Eric G to come pick them up at 2:10. So I'm going to assume that Bethany and Dylan were both there at that time, and they texted the Uber driver to come get them. Now, we see this vehicle that matches the same vehicle that dropped off Kaylee and Maddie at 1:56, going west on Linda Lane, passing the Linda Lane, 1320 Linda Lane camera at 2:25:47. Then we see the same vehicle going back at 2:29:46. I believe this vehicle is carrying Dylan and Bethany off somewhere. I don't know where. Now, we also know that text and calls to Jack D start at 2:36 and they end at 2:52. These calls start 10 minutes after the roommates leave. Does this indicate that Kaylee and Maddie were worried that either Dylan or Bethany were going to see Jack D? Is that a possibility? I have no other evidence around that other than just an assumption by looking at the times on these things and why something would happen. So let's go back to that timeline real quick. Okay, so again, starting right here at 2 a.m., we got Kaylee, Maddie, Bethany, and Dylan. They're all in Kaylee's room. Dylan texts Eric Gower to inquire if he's driving. Eric Gower responds that he is driving, and then there's no other text or calls to Eric Gower, so I would have to assume that he's on his way to pick him up. And then we see that same vehicle that was supposedly Eric Gower that dropped off Maddie and Kaylee heading towards the King Road residence at 2:25. We see the headlights on the trees as it pulls up, and then we see it passing Linda Lane, going back by at 2:29. So I have to assume that Eric Gower came and picked up probably Dylan and Bethany at that point and took them somewhere. Now, I think it's interesting that just a few minutes after this happens, like 10 minutes, Kaylee and Maddie start calling Jack D, and they start calling him. We call him 9 times between that point and 2:52. Now, during that time that they're calling Jack D, another thing happens, and I'm going to point that out here in just a second. But one thing I also want to point out is after they make all those calls and texts to Jack D, at 2:53, Maddie calls BF. So, I mean, it kind of looks to me, and I don't know the specifics on this, but if Kaylee had gone home for a few weeks because her and Jack D broke up, well, Jack D may have been, I mean, I think it's fair to assume that Jack D may have been possibly seeing one of those other roommates. I have no evidence to this. I'm just thinking out loud. But if that was the case, and then when Dylan and Bethany left the house and Kaylee and Maddie start calling Jack D, I mean, it kind of makes me think how youngsters would think that maybe you're getting jealous and nervous something's happening. You know, they start calling Jack D hoping that Dylan or Bethany's not meeting up with him. And the fact that Maddie calls Bethany at 2:53 maybe is Maddie easing away from Kaylee to call Bethany to, you know, just see if she's meeting up with Jack D. I mean, I think that's very plausible. But during the time that Kaylee and Maddie start calling Jack D, something else happens. We have a car that passes Linda Lane at 2:47:39, and that is a black sport utility vehicle with some very, very specific exhaust. At 2:48:19, that vehicle pulls up in front of the King Road house, and 2:48:19, it pulls past the King Road house. 2:49:02, it pulls up in front of the Linda Lane apartments. Now, I got some really specific things on this one now. Okay, so right here at 2:47:44, we see this black sport utility pass Linda Lane, and it's got some very specific exhaust, very loud sport utility. And then we see it pull up into the Linda Lane apartments a short time later. All right, note the time it parks, 2:48:50 roughly. Now listen close. Now, one time I said that was a scream, and that was them going in, but it's not a scream. That is either a bird call or a whistle. Now that sound right there is undoubtedly a chain or possibly handcuffs. Listen again. There was another sound resembling a chain. Listen again. Now, a lot of people hear that and assume those are screams. I did as well the first time, but they're not. That's another bird call. And then he heads towards the King Road residence at 2:51. And I know what you're saying. Well, why would there be bird calls? Well, because bird calls are how the military communicate in a covert situation, and it's also how experienced criminals communicate in a covert situation. He was yelling bird calls to somebody else that was closer to the house. My guess was Farley. Let's continue. Okay, we all know now that Maddie and Kaylee go silent after 2:53. No more phone calls. That tells me that they were alive and well until 2:53. Now, here's something that I have never heard anybody question in a manner that I feel like is the most plausible manner, but I'm going to do it in this one. And I've kind of held off on doing it because I know everybody wants to believe that Maddie and Kaylee, they sleep in the same bed because Steve G said they've been sleeping in the same bed since they were kids. And Kaylee fought off the attackers is why, she got more damage or all that stuff. But I'm going to look at this from a investigative perspective and give you my opinion of what took place right here. Because we know from the evidence that we just talked about that both girls are last seen in Kaylee's larger bedroom at 210. So all of those girls going and meeting in Kaylee's room kind of threw everything for a loop in my mind. I hope it did in everybody's, because we always thought Kaylee and Maddie just went right up to Maddie's room, right? But now we know that all the girls supposedly met up in Kaylee's room. Well, if that is the case, then how does Kaylee and Maddie go from being in Kaylee's room with a big old bed into Maddie's room with a little bed? Well, I'm going to assume that if I was correct, and let's say that Kaylee and Maddie were calling Jack D because they were a little bit afraid that those roommates may have been going to meet Jack D, and then there was a call all of a sudden from Maddie to Bethany. Well, if Maddie knew something that Kaylee didn't know, she might have eased away from Kaylee and went to her own bedroom to make that last call to Bethany just to see if that's what was happening and not hurt Maddie's feelings. But if at that point the two girls went to their separate bedrooms, and we know that there is an assailant heading towards that house at 2:51, and then the girls' phones stop at 2:53, well, here's what an experienced assailant would do if he was going in to subdue these two. He wouldn't do it in two different rooms, and he wouldn't go get them out of Kaylee's room and put them in Maddie's room. But if they are in two different rooms, you can bet that they would go and get Kaylee out of one room and put her in there with Maddie, because that room's smaller and it's easier to, contain them. And the fact that they started out in Kaylee's room, but they're both unalived in Maddie's bed, it doesn't tell me that Kaylee went to sleep with Maddie or that Kaylee heard Maddie and got up and went to protect her. It tells me they went and got Kaylee and put her in the room with Maddie. That is the most likely scenario in my opinion. And if you look at the timeline, both girls are last seen in the larger bedroom at 2:10. Sport U pulls up at 2:59 or 2:49. From 2:49 to 2:51, you hear whistles and bird calls, an obvious gathering of things from the vehicle. They head towards the house at 2:51. Both girls go silent at 2:53. Both girls are found unalived in Maddie's bed. I believe they went in, got Kaylee, put her in Maddie's bed, and subdued them. I don't believe they were unalived at this time. And when I look at those, and I showed y'all this in videos a while back, but one of the things that the investigators felt the need to come out and debunk, and they didn't debunk many things, so they felt like this one was necessary. So it makes me suspicious that it may have been true. But they have been forced to publicly dispel a number of false rumors related to the investigation, including online reports that the victims were found bound and gagged. Well, what would be the point of the investigation to dispel that rumor? Especially if that was true and you were looking for real assailants with real knowledge of the crime, then you wouldn't want to come out and dispel that rumor. But if you wanted to stop people from thinking that, because then you would know it's a hit, then you would definitely want to dispel that rumor. I believe that one to be true. And what does all this tell me? It tells me the crime started at approximately 2:54 a.m. If the targets were Maddie and Xana, or even Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana, Nothing has ever indicated to me that Ethan wasn't collateral damage. Ethan wasn't, frat boys wouldn't want to hurt Ethan. With Xana not being home yet, the others would be subdued till the other target arrived. They wouldn't have done this in stages. They would have subdued the two until the other target got there and then committed the atrocity. Kaylee would have been brought by force to Maddie's room to keep them both in check till Xana arrived back. The driver of the Sport U is suspect number 1, in my humble opinion.
Remember, these people said that it was a crime of passion, it was targeted, and it was an isolated event, all this language. And then they even said, you're going to have to trust us. You're just going to have to wait and trust us. And now we've waited, and it's like, no. Well, there was no connection whatsoever that we could establish. So how do you get isolated? How do you get targeted? So, he didn't force him to say that he did it solo by himself. Didn't force him to prove that he was wearing the suit or show us where the sheath, the knife is to the sheath. A lot of their strategy for this sealing and gagging was because they were afraid of the civil actions. But those are mostly have to be brought up within 2 years. And it's hard to bring something up that you're not been able to even look at. Like, we don't even know who made the decision and what was all done. So I think this was a strategy for them to cover up their tails and the university's ass. And, there's 2 huge universities there. One, they literally sent the students back saying it was an isolated, targeted event, and literally the murder was hired by one of the universities. Literally, the murder was hired by one of the universities. People need to look back when he was fired. He was fired on the 19th. That's the exact same day that the police said that the FBI told them that Brian was a suspect. It's kind of more than suspicious that, WSU fired him that exact same day. They don't work for us anymore, guys. They think that we are lucky to be in that courtroom, and they're like a form of royal bloodlines.
Still fascinated by the comment he made upon arrest. Have you arrested anyone else? Thinking, is he throwing a red herring in? Is he really curious about other possible suspects? But when you said drunk, passed out girls, gagging girls, was there something that happened at the crime scene involving gagging that you heard?
Yeah. That's what we've heard. Yeah. That's what we've heard. That's why we want to get all these facts straight. So we don't want to have a statement that isn't accurate. But when you have a prosecution that just is okay with covering everything up and not telling you what's going on, it's hard to be accurate. And they've criticized us for not being accurate on certain things. And it's because we're not getting the facts. Parents shouldn't have to beg to know what happened to their kid the last 24 hours of their life.
Did someone with the investigation describe that Kaylee or Maddie was gagged during this horrible crime?
I was told that by somebody in I can give that out. That was Babbitt. That was Babbitt who gave that information.
Both girls are last seen in the larger bedroom at 2:10. Sport U pulls up at 2:59 or 2:49. From 2:49 to 2:51, you hear whistles and bird calls, an obvious gathering of things from the vehicle. They head towards the house at 2:51. Both girls go silent at 2:53. Both girls are found unalived in Maddie's bed. I believe they went in, got Kaylee, put her in Maddie's bed, and subdued them. I don't believe they were unalived at this time. But one of the things that the investigators felt the need to come out and debunk, and they didn't debunk many things, so they felt like this one was necessary. So it makes me suspicious that it may have been true. But they have been forced to publicly dispel a number of false rumors related to the investigation, including online reports that the victims were found bound and gagged. Well, what would be the point of the investigation to dispel that rumor? Especially if that was true and you were looking for real assailants with real knowledge of the crime, then you wouldn't want to come out and dispel that rumor. But if you wanted to stop people from thinking that, because then you would know it's a hit, then you would definitely want to dispel that rumor. I believe that one to be true.
When you said drunk, passed out girls gagging girls, was there something that happened at the crime scene involving gagging that you heard?
Yeah. That's what we've heard. Yeah. That's what we've heard.
Now, I'm not saying that it was that video that forced the state into making that plea deal and getting this thing closed and out of people's eyes. But I think you have to agree in the case of 1,000 coincidences, such as the Idaho 4 case, the Idaho 4 case. And when I do a video, because I had been working on this crime scene for so long, where it finally started to come to light, I got enough information to be able to ascertain that it looked like the victims were subdued at 254, kept alive until Xana and Ethan actually returned home. And I've got much more evidence that's going to back that up after watching the Prime Video show, reading the entire Patterson book. It's easy to go through and pick out what could be true and what's obviously false, because there are a lot of things in there that could be true, because there's some things they can't manipulate. And when I finally put all that together for you, I think you're going to be amazed. But I put out a video finally acknowledging that it was more likely a subdued situation. And then I go all the way back to the beginning and I find an obscure media report of debunking the victims being found bound and gagged. And who else out there has said, you know what? I believe this media report debunking this was done on purpose. I believe they were found bound and gagged because it matched up to the evidence that I was providing in that video. And then I'll be dang, they lift the gag order, and Steve G goes on Banfield, and what's the first piece of secret information that's revealed? They found Maddie and Kaylee bound and gagged. You can't add binding and gagging to the 7-minute unaliving timeline by a one-off Ted Bundy incel guy and still have enough time to make everything happen. And you know that's true. Pav got it right. And I'm not done. I'm going to get it all right in the end. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, your thoughts, your criticisms. Again, thank you to everybody out there that supports me. I really appreciate you. Pavarotti's out.